Hello, gentlemen. We're going to pick up where we left off. This presentation is entitled 5 Key Personages of the Enlightenment. Let's talk about 5 key philosophers. But before we do that, let's back up and finish with the last couple of slides that got cut off of the last presentation because I think it'll be helpful. All right. We ended talking about how in Europe, the toleration of the Enlightenment, right? The idea that people have different opinions about this stuff tended to mean that there is no right opinion about this stuff, which is a very different thing. That's relativism, says there is no right opinion, which isn't actually, it's not relative. It's not a relative statement. Relativism doesn't stand up to its own weight. It contradicts itself, in other words. At any rate, but it tended to be that way. And then in Germany, we talked about, just briefly, mentioned that it became kind of a reasonable Christianity, try to change Christians among themselves, and it ended up kind of a neutered version of Christianity, kind of a lion without the roar, without the power, right? Rather than Christ as the man-God or the God-man, it makes him simply man. And not a very compelling one at that. It's Christianity without revealed truths, things that you can really bank on and trust, or without miracles. It's kind of what liberal Protestantism becomes later in the 1800s, 1900s. It's kind of this neutered version of Christianity. Just be nice to people kind of thing. Anyway, this is a famous picture of a salon. That's where the philosophers would gather, the movers, the shakers. And you get this kind of sense of this is the place to be of the time, despite the crazy fashions, right? Okay, now remember, like this attitude's like leaven in the dough. You know, before the French Revolution, which starts in 1789, these attitudes were held by a small but extraordinarily influential percentage of people, the educated, and often the aristocratic elite, especially in France. Okay, thus concludes the Enlightenment anti-Christian in intent and effect. Now we want to switch over to the 5 key personages. Like we did a minute ago. Okay. Pardon me, gentlemen. It takes a second to get right on. Get this thing right. Okay. There we go. The personages. If you're a personage, it means you're really important. You've got clout. People should stop and pay attention, right? If you're a personage. Personages. And I'm leaving several personages out. I'm only going to do these 5. Especially I'm leaving out some key English ones and some early American ones. But these are the most influential from the perspective of the history of the church. The philosophers. René Descartes, Voltaire, Denis Diderot, Immanuel Kant, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Okay, these are the portraits of these people. We're going to start with René Descartes. We mentioned him in the last presentation. Born 1596, died 1650. Mathematician, philosopher, practicing Catholic. He never rejected the faith, but he had this skeptical attitude. Right? He's the one who came up with this idea of the Cartesian plane, right? The X and Y axes. He's a brilliant mathematician, very clear thinker. Right? Remember his famous statement, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. But this attitude of consistent doubt, right? And you can only accept what can be absolutely proved in a way that you can understand is a dangerous idea. Now, why is that? You know, if you're among the more inquiring minds in the room, I'm picturing a few of you in my head right now. You say, well, what's wrong with that, right? You know, if you're smart, it's especially dangerous. But the problem is, it makes it incapable for you, or for yourself, to accept anything that's better than what you yourself can get, right? Now, picture a third grader, right? Picture a third grader in the Avalon school, and you try to explain to him the coordinate plane or the slope-intercept form of the equation of a line. There's no way he has the intellectual tools to get it. There's nothing wrong with these ideas, these mathematical truths, if you will. It's just that he's not ready for them. And if he just rejects them because he cannot understand them, right, he's missing something that, that's a good thing. Now, at some point, we all come across our own limits, and that's the danger of rejecting what you can't understand. He did with supernatural truths, don't forget, but this attitude, the skepticism, was adopted by others who did apply it to supernatural things too. This next guy, of course, is Voltaire, which is his pen name, his nom de plume, pen name, for Francois-Marie Arouet. I mispronounced it probably. Maybe the most influential of the philosophers, right? As I mentioned, he repackaged ideas and was very good at mocking others, a real personality. You can just picture him having a talk show, late night show on TV today, but very influential. Despite his personal war on Christianity that we referred to last presentation, that he said, remember, that Christ needed 12 apostles to spread the gospel. He thought he could single-handedly eliminate it, right? But he himself attended Mass so that the serfs, the peasants on his plantations could see, because he thought it was good for them. These enlightened ideas are only for the movers and the shakers like him. Interesting. Like I said, he was obsessed with eliminating Christianity. And there's the quote again from the last presentation. This next one, Denis Diderot, 1713 to 1784. Now, he planned the encyclopedia. Think about this. We have Wikipedia now online, and when I was in high school, most families would have a set of encyclopedias like Britannica or Funk and Wagnalls, or there are a lot of different types of encyclopedias. But there basically would be a place, a bank of all knowledge, not superficial, not as deep as tremendous books on every subject, but your set of encyclopedias would go, you'd have at least one for each letter of the alphabet. So you'd be looking at probably about 30, 35 books. Some like the S, you might have two. And it would have articles on all these different things. It's a bank of all knowledge, kind of like Google for the time. Think of the ambition. So I can put together a document that has all this knowledge. He didn't do it all himself. He planned it. He had other people help write it, but it's a pretty astounding thing. Immanuel Kant, he's a German. Okay, again, the 18th century. And he separates the realms of religion and reason. Right? This is a dangerous thing because we're supposed to worship with our reason. Right? And we're rational beings, but we don't shut off our reason as Catholics. Right? You don't stop using your mind or your reason to accept any truth of faith. You use it to understand it. Okay, when you accept it, you don't shut off your reason. Anyway, he found it necessary to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith, which is a little bit different twist on it. He would deny what he knew ordinarily to make room for faith. And so he's still a believer on some level, but it's not healthy. It's not healthy. What if science seems to contradict something that's revealed in the faith? Well, basically say, well, it seems that way now is what you should say, and to keep looking for good science and to understand revelation too, For example, if you're at the time of Galileo and, someone's saying, well, the scripture says the sun rises, and you can say, well, it's poetically true that it rises, right? It appears to rise from our point of view, but it isn't a scientific truth. You can say, is it so properly understood, right? You have to make sure you have both those things. As Catholics, we have confidence there, but we don't shut off our mind ever to remain Catholic. Okay, now again, what Kant is rejecting from the Christian tradition here is the practical reason applied to things. Practical reason that goes a long way, right? Aristotle allowed that man had an eternal soul. He came to this truth just by thinking about the world and observing things closely. Aristotle, the man of uncommon common sense, right? Okay, that there was a God, right, that ordered the universe, and that the soul was immortal. And this was purely on the mind. And Kant's kind of turning this whole idea that the mind can come up with anything meaningful like that on its head. Okay, he had a tremendous influence on later 19th century thought, Kant. Okay, my least favorite of all the philosophers, For me, he's like the Woodrow Wilson, my least favorite American of all time. Jean-Jacques Rousseau is my least favorite thinker in the last 500 years. Okay? To me, it's a one-man transitional period from the Enlightenment to the Romantic movement, because there's elements of both in his thought. The Romantic movement is going to come after the Enlightenment, obviously. He himself demonstrates how it's possible to go from one error to the other without stopping at the correct position in the middle, right? From this Enlightenment cockiness that we can understand all things, to kind of going by pure emotion, feeling, and mystery without having any sense of absolute truth. He kind of swung the whole gamut without kind of seeing that the author of everything is a mystery, that being God, and that we can understand much of it because he's reason itself. At any rate, I'm oversimplifying, of course. He lived a life of ease, writing, pontificating, right? He had many illegitimate children. I read 15 somewhere at one point, but I wasn't sure, so I just put 10 in the text here. And he didn't take care of them. And then he would walk by the orphanage where they were, and he would weep for them as he walked by, but didn't do anything to help them or man up to his responsibilities as a father. Gives you a good indicator into the man's worldview. His political philosophy is still with us today, right? It provides the rationale for totalitarianism. Like and certain ideas that are still in our general vocabulary for politics. The social contract, the general will, or the noble savage, which is more of just an idea. That's a romantic idea that says that before civilization, man was basically good and noble and would get along with everyone and everything until civilization comes, or Christianity more particularly. The general will is that there's a general idea what people want in society, and it gets focused in one person or in one movement, and it ends up being one person, one ruler, right? And of course, whoever is in charge says, well, I am the general will, whether it be a Joseph Stalin, a Mao Zedong, an Adolf Hitler. Incidentally, they didn't come up with these ideas. Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson in the United States said the same thing, since they were the only official elected by the entire people. The social contract is probably still the most socially respectable today. This idea, just by being born into a society, you accept certain premises. I don't know. I think there's an element where it's true, a degree to it, it's true, but it's a little bit shaky. These ideas are Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Like I say, you can't have Hegel without Rousseau. You can't have Marx without Hegel. You can't have Lenin, Stalin, and Mao Zedong without Marx. So, it's a slippery slope. This man did a lot of damage. And thus concludes our presentation on the 5 key Enlightenment personages. Take care, fellas.